Have you ever wanted to light a horse on fire? Swing it around like a giant club, smashing it into your enemies? If so, then you probably need to talk to a professional and avoid pet ownership at all costs. But you probably will also like today's build. So, long story short, a viewer commented requesting I build the weirdest Psi Warrior build I could possibly do. I think today I can accomplish that. This is the weirdest Psi Warrior build I've ever seen. And even though most of our levels are not Psi Warrior, we end up using the Psi Warrior's abilities every turn, especially the telekinetic movement, which I think is the most unique feature about it. So hopefully, this fulfills your request. So my past few builds have been all about control. And I think it's super interesting. I really wanted to test out my control per round calculations, but today we're just going pure damage. We're going to take these gloves off and see just what we can do. So we're not really going to focus on control or durability at all. For our race, I really wanted to go halfling, but it ended up having our damage output be too low early levels before our build really got online. So I decided to go High Elf and take Booming Blade as our cantrip. So this will really help prop our damage up while the build matures. But if we went Halfling, we would be able to move through enemy spaces, and that would be quite useful for us. So if you do start out at a higher level, maybe just go Halfling. For stats, we want Dex to be our highest, and then we basically want an even spread through all the other stats except Strength. We can just dump Strength. We actually don't depend on our stats much at all in this build, especially once it comes online. So it's not that important. And I guess Constitution becomes the most important since it helps us survive longer. But like I said, we're not going for that. So we'll start out right with our concept as a fighter. We're going to go 3 levels of fighter into Psi Warrior, and that'll get us access to all those interesting abilities. Psi Warriors are known for being the Jedi Knights of D&D, and it's a pretty cool concept. They have psionic dice that they can use to fuel their abilities, kind of like Battle Masters and their superiority dice. Except right now, we only have 3 options. We can either increase the damage we deal, block some incoming attacks to us or other people, or we can do telekinetic movement. And essentially, this is using the Force to move objects or creatures around. And this is going to be very important to our build once we get there. So let me read the text. You can move an object or a creature with your mind. As an action, you target one loose object that is large or smaller, or one willing creature other than yourself. If you can see the target and it is within 30 feet of you, you can move it up to 30 feet to an unoccupied space you can see. It would be nice if we could choose the path that they get to, but it seems like it's a straight line. Alternatively, if it's a tiny object, you can move it into your hand. Either way, you can move the target horizontally, vertically, or both. Once you take this action, you can't do so again until you finish a short or long rest, or you expend a psionic energy dice to take it again. Out of combat, it's kind of like a mage hand. You can do cool little tricks with it, but in combat, you can actually use it to place your allies around the battlefield in some pretty great ways. Right now, though, since all we care about is damage, we are just going to focus on the Psionic Strike, which increases our damage by a d6, plus our intelligence modifier. Now let me dive a little bit into what I imagine my character's story to be here. You are a knight, and you have a very special bond with your horse, named Horsey. You charge into the fray, fighting as one. Then, when the battle's over, you relax together, play Horsey's favorite songs as you chill in the stable. Unfortunately, one day during battle, Horsey was killed. And in that moment of pain and panic, you unlocked a portion of your mind you didn't know you had, and you unleashed your psionic potential. In spite of that, you just couldn't keep going like you used to, and you decided to take to the roads, playing as a minstrel and sharing Horsey's favorite songs with the world. So, yeah, after 3 levels of fighter, we're gonna take some bard levels. Actually, just pure bard levels from now on. And since our stats are so spread out, we are a pretty terrible bard. So, When you're picking spells, try to pick ones that don't need saving throws or are just utility spells. Now we're at level 5 and we come to our first character build analysis. We are nowhere near having our build online, but I always do my analysis at levels 5, 9, 13, and 17 whenever we increase our proficiency bonus. And during this analysis, I take a look at 3 different aspects of character build. 1 is damage output, which is today's build. 2 is control, and the last one is our durability, how long we can survive. I run all these numbers, and usually I show how the calculations go, but today I'm going to do something different. I have done the entire build and all the calculations for these 3 aspects in a spreadsheet, and I'll link that in the description, so if you want to see the numbers and how they all go, take a look there. I hope this works well for you. I want people to be confident that the math I'm doing is correct, but I also don't want to spend so much time going over calculations in the video. So let me know if this works for you. Now, for these 3 aspects, let me just give a brief summary of how they work and what they really mean. So for damage, I calculate DPR, which is a pretty common way of doing it. In addition though, I like to take that DPR number and put it into context. I calculate something I call combat space, and essentially that means if you were to fight a deadly encounter and deal that DPR, what percentage of that encounter's HP would you expect to take out? So, for example, 25% is average, and if you're familiar with the Warlock baseline damage, it's around 25 too. For crowd control, I have a strange way of calculating this, but essentially it is based on percentages of unconsciousness. So if your control is 100 per round, that's the equivalent of knocking one enemy unconscious each turn, which is obviously very powerful. 25 is moderate control, 50 is good control. Here in this build, it's going to be almost nothing. For durability, I calculate how many rounds you'd survive if everybody in a deadly encounter focused their attacks on you, not just attacks on your AC, but also constitution saves and dex saves. Lasting 1 round is on the more fragile side, lasting 2 rounds is on the more durable side. Now let me show you the strategy we're going to use in combat as well as the results of the analysis. At level 5, we're going to just run up with our rapier, use a booming blade to slash them, and when available, we're going to boost that attack with our psionic dice to add in an extra d6 plus our intelligence modifier. So if we do that and we do an action surge to do it again once per combat, then our damage per round is 18.6, and that will take out 35.7% of a deadly encounter, which is actually somewhat high damage. But we don't have our build online, so just you wait. For control, Booming Blade offers some discouragement of our enemies moving, so it's a little bit of control. We end up averaging at 6.75 control per round, which is pretty low, like I said. For our durability, we have 19 AC from wearing scale mail, a shield, and the defensive fighting style. We also have proficiency in con saves, so that reduces some of the damage. So at this level, a deadly encounter would deal 30.4 damage per round on average, and that means we would last 1.4 rounds, which is fine. Alright, let's move on to level 6 to 9, and this is where things really start to get interesting for us. During our period of mourning for Horsey, we're wandering the world, playing our songs, and we discover a way to enchant our music in such a way that it lures Horsey back from the grave. Only something's a little different about him. He brings some of the energy from the underworld with him. Now, when he runs, he can blaze a trail of fire behind him. Mechanically speaking, we're going to continue along with Bard. At level 3, we get our subclass, and we're going to choose College of Lore. Then we continue all the way to level 6, and this is when we get our great College of Lore subclass feature, Magical Secrets. This means we can choose 2 spells from any class's spell list. We are going to choose one from the Paladin spell list, Find Steed. And then we're going to choose a second one from the Wizard spell list, a Chardalon's Stride. Maybe a lot of you saw this coming. Let me give a quick idea of what these 2 spells do. For Find Steed, it kind of does what the name says. You can summon a steed that you can ride, and it takes the form of a couple of different options. We're going to choose Warhorse here because it's horsey, and you get to choose its type. Now it's either going to be a Celestial, a Fae, or a Fiend, and for this context, we're going to go with Fiend. But the most important part of the spell for us is that when you cast a spell that only targets yourself, it can also target your mount. So a Chardalon's Stride is a spell that only targets us. So it can target both me and my horse from now on. A Chardalon's Stride is a 3rd level spell. It ends up using your concentration, and it gives you 20 extra movement speed, and you no longer provoke opportunity attacks. In addition, whenever you move within 5 feet of a creature, they automatically take 1d6 fire damage. And they don't get any save, and there's no attack, they just take the damage. It also specifies that a creature can only take this damage once on a turn, even if it comes from multiple sources. So you and your horsey together run by somebody. Unfortunately, they'll only take one of those damages. But we will find a way to get around this pretty soon. Now, one key question you're going to have to figure out with your DM if you want to use this build is the term when you move. Now, you could interpret this a couple different ways, but for the purpose of this build, I'm going to assume that it counts forced movement. And yes, eventually we're going to use telekinetic movement to get this off again. If your DM doesn't agree with that, it's actually not a big problem, but it kind of negates the whole Psi Warrior part of this build. A couple other things that we pick up along the way to Bard 6 is we get our first ASI, and I'm going to take Metamagic Adept, and we're going to take the Transmute Spell option. This means when we cast a spell that is fire, we can change it to another element, say thunder. So when you're encountering those enemies that are resistant or immune to fire, you now have a way to get around that. And then bards also get expertise in 2 skills, which means you double your proficiency. And I want to take acrobatics here because we really don't want to get grappled. And boosting our acrobatics will help us get out of those. Okay, so now that we have our demonified horsey back, you're going to start the battle mounted. And first turn, you can use your bonus action to cast a Chardalon's Stride. Then you dismount and you run around as many enemies as you possibly can. Dismounting is going to use half your movement here, so you'll end up with 25 feet, which is still hopefully good. Then on one of those enemies we run past, we stab them with the rapier to do our booming blade plus our psionic strike combo, and then we run away without provoking opportunity attacks. So now it's even more likely that our booming blade is going to go off. Here, I'm assuming 75% chance now. On Horsey's turn, it's going to run around by itself, lighting the enemies on fire, and it's going to charge at an enemy and attempt to trample them as well. Then, hopefully it still has enough movement to run away and stay away from danger. Now, in all of the calculations I do here for a Chardalon's Stride from this point forward, I'm going to assume that we are hitting 3 targets each time we move. This might be a stretch, it might be a little conservative. It all depends on what your encounter looks like. Using these tactics, we end up dealing 54.9 damage per round, and that ends up being 69.5% of a deadly encounter. That's well over half of an encounter just by yourself. It's a lot of damage, and it's just going to explode from here. For control, we're still using Booming Blade, and it's the exact same. We get 6.75 control per round. And durability, even though we've got more HP, the monsters are dealing more damage and have a higher to hit chance, so we actually are still lasting 1.4 rounds. Now, let's continue along to levels 10 to 13. We continue along the Bard path, and we learn even more powerful songs that can bring out this connection between Horsey and the underworld. This gives Horsey skeletal wings, and its fire is even more powerful than before. This boost, mechanically, is coming from Bard's level 10 magical secrets. Again, we get to pick 2 spells from any class's spell list. We're going with Find Greater Steed here from the Paladin spell list. And this is basically the same as Find Steed, but we get to pick better steed options. And here, we're going to go with Pegasus. It's horsey, but with wings. It has an amazing fly speed, and it's decently durable. For the second spell, I would say maybe pick up something that would help Horsey stay alive a little bit longer. Maybe Aid or Armor of Agathis. These are both really cool options, and since Armor of Agathis only targets yourself, if you are riding Horsey while you cast it, it also targets Horsey. For me though, I'm going to pick Aid because it can also help the rest of our party, and it doesn't really mess with our action economy. We also get one more ASI, and I chose Warcaster here, just because we really don't want to lose our concentration. Our tactics here though have a massive shift. This is because our Chardalon Stride is so much stronger that it's more worthwhile for us to use our turns and our actions to move instead of attacking. So at the start of the battle, we cast a Chardalon Stride at 5th level, which is our highest spell slot now, and that will deal 3d6 damage to all the enemies we get close to. It also gives us plus 35 movement speed, and Horsey too. Then on our turn, we run past as many enemies as we can, and then we ready action to use telekinetic movement on Horsey on a different turn. Horsey, on their turn, they're going to fly around with their movement, trying to hit all the enemies they can, and since they're flying, it's a lot easier to just dip on all the enemies. Then they're going to ready their action to do it again on another turn. So Horsey activates a Chardalon Stride twice each round. Then we are also using our telekinetic movement to smash or pull Horsey along the battlefield, hitting all the enemies with a Chardalon Stride a 3rd time with Horsey. Now we've really hit our stride. We are using our full potential as a Psi Warrior to wield our flaming horse like a weapon in the battlefield. Since Horsey is flying, and since 3 of the 4 instances of a Chardalon Stride damage are coming from Horsey, this actually is still a pretty viable tactic on flying enemies too, which are pretty common at this point. So each turn, we're dealing 3d6 damage to each of the enemies, and like I said, we're assuming 3. So that's 9d6, and since we're doing it 4 times a round, that ends up being 36d6 that is unavoidable damage. This averages out to 126 damage per round, and in terms of a deadly encounter, this is going to take out 109% of an encounter. You can take out a deadly encounter all by yourself, and Horsey. But this is incredible damage. And if there's only one enemy you're hitting, that's still 42 damage per round, and that is 36% of a deadly encounter. Still good damage. For control, we are not doing any control. Yeah, we are using our telekinetic movement on Horsey, but since we're just using him to deal damage, I'm not going to count that as control. For durability, with Aid we get a little more HP, and we still last 1.4 rounds. Wow, pretty consistent. Now, moving on to our last group of levels we're going to look at. This is 14 to 17. We just continue with Bard all the way through. We get even more magical secrets, and I'd say maybe pick up things like Wall of Force. That would be a great option if we're stuck in an enclosed area and we want to do something beneficial, and there's no save to it, so it's great. We get another ASI, and I chose Resilient Wisdom here. I really don't want to get controlled, and that's so common at this level. What we care most about is that we're increasing our spell slot progression. Now we can cast a Chardalon Stride as a 7th level spell. This now deals 5d6 damage and boosts our speed by 40. So if we follow the same tactics that we've been doing, but use a 7th level spell, we will deal 210 damage per round. That's 138% of a deadly encounter. It's almost 1.5 deadly encounters by yourself. That's a buttload of damage. No saves, no attacks, hits flying creatures, gets around damage resistance and immunity, and it can deal amazing AoE damage if you have a ton of monsters. I hope your DM gives you just one battle where you're fighting a horde of enemies. You light this up, just run up and down the battlefield and kill hundreds of them each turn. That would be a moment you never forget. Yes, in my calculations, the damage is divided up among 3 creatures, but most of the time you're going to be fighting several creatures in an encounter anyway, so I don't think it's a big deal. For our control, we're still doing 0 control, and we're fine with that. Durability has gone down a little bit. We are now lasting 1.3 rounds instead of 1.4. This is the last point that I'm going to analyze the build, but if you wanted to continue, I'd say just continue right along Bard. At level 20, you'll finally get your 9th level spells, and you can take some great things like Wish and True Polymorph, and then you can be a horsey flying alongside your horsey if you want to. It's a dream come true. So now at this point, we can average out the damage, control, and durability that we have throughout our entire career, from levels 5, 9, 13, 17 that we've taken a look at. The standout here is the damage. Our career average is 88.2% of a deadly encounter. That's a lot. Okay, now that we've seen what this build can do, let's go over some of the hiccups or problems that might come up along the way. I think it's pretty obvious. This build is a one-trick horsey. And so that might be pretty boring to play. And once it comes online, it deals way too much damage for the average table. Then you have a problem of your action economy. It's spread out over so many turns that your party is probably not gonna like you. You are going to be interrupting everyone's turn all the time, and you're gonna probably hog the spotlight. So because of these reasons, I wouldn't suggest playing this in a long-term campaign. Maybe a really short one or a one-shot. It could be fun to test the concept out and give it a try. Another big issue is that a Chardalon Stride also hits our allies. So if we're in an enclosed area, we just can't use this tactic at all. We're gonna plow right through our allies if we do. But taking all these issues in stride, I feel like we've made a really interesting, different, and weird Psi Warrior build that I had a load of fun doing. So I hope you enjoyed it, and please let me know what you would do differently, or what you think wouldn't work mechanically. I'm all ears. Thanks again for watching, and have a great day.